In the previous session, we looked at the detailed meaning of poems 2 and 3 of the longer poem Preludes by T.S. Eliot. We have now come to the last poem, which is poem 4, lines 39 to 42. His soul stretched tight across the skies that fade behind a city block or trampled by incessant feet at 4 and 5 and 6 o'clock. Poem 4 begins with the second mention of a soul. A soul was first mentioned in line 28 in reference to the anonymous, means unknown, woman described in section 3. This time the soul belongs to an unidentified man, and the language implies that the image of a soul stretched tight across the skies is a Christian one. Stretched tight recalls the taut skin of Jesus pinned to the cross and the fact that it stretches across the skies, which is an impossible position for a human to be. Hints at something larger than human, large enough to encompass the skies themselves. यानी कि जब जीसस क्राइस्ट को सूली पर लटका दिया गया था तो उनके जो शरीर की स्किन है वो खिंची हुई थी, उनका शरीर खिंच रहा था क्योंकि उनके हाथों और पैरों को एक बड़ी कील से सूली पर अटका दिया गया था. The enjambment in line 39 across the skies that fade reflects this idea of stretching as well as the immensity of the skies. Immensity means the largeness themselves, as one phrase stretches across the line break to the next. ये जो oblique mark है skies और that के बीच में, ये indicate करता है कि line यहाँ पर बदल रही है, लेकिन thought continued है. इस टेक्निक को enjambment कहते हैं. On that note, the skies are often a symbol for heaven. Finally, in Christian theology, Jesus is a redeemer of humankind's sins. यानी कि जीसस क्राइस्ट ने इंसानों के पापों के बदले में उन्होंने हमको बचाया था. At this point, the poem thus seems to gesture towards the possibility that the filthy, dirty, dehumanizing way of life described in parts 1, 2 and 3 can be redeemed. यानी कि उसमें सुधार आ सकता है. However, the poem then immediately calls this hopeful idea into question. The skies are fading behind a city block, as if the window of opportunity for redemption is closing. And more importantly, the soul is trampled, meaning crushed by insistent feet. Enjambment here again echoes the line's content, as line 41 seems to trample over the line break, or trampled by insistent feet at 4. यानी कि thought continued है. This is also yet another instance of preludes describing people as led unthinkingly by their body parts, which here has the serious consequence of trampling humankind's only chance of redemption. Redemption means being saved. नरक से आपका बचाव करने के लिए ही जीसस क्राइस्ट आए थे, लेकिन यहाँ पर ये बताया जा रहा है कि ह्यूमन काइंड को, इंसानों को कोई नहीं बचा सकता. Finally, the accumulation of clock times on line 42 implies that, far from being close to ending, all this mindless routine is only accelerating. Accelerating means speeding up. उसकी गति बढ़ रही है. The polysyndeton here, 4 and 5 and 6, ये जो and का repetition है, further adds to the sensation of a monotonous routine piling up. Monotonous means dull and boring. Boring सा जब कोई काम हमको बार बार करना पड़ता है. There is no escape for city dwellers from the endless drudgery of urban life, drudgery that goes on at every hour. ड्रजरी का मतलब भी बोरियत होता है, जब कोई काम आपको करना है और लगातार आप करे जा रहे हैं और उसमें ना तो आपका मन लग रहा है लेकिन मजबूरी है, सो करना है. Lines 43 to 47. And short square fingers, stuffing pipes, and evening newspapers and eyes, assured of certain certainties, the conscience of a blackened street, impatient to assume the world. Lines 43 to 45 use a variety of techniques to emphasize the mindless, monotonous, means dull and boring routine, referenced in line 42. लाइन में के शब्द ऐसे हैं at 4 and 5 and 6 o'clock. Line 43 uses sibilance, meaning the repetition of the S letter, to suggest the abundance of smoky fingers stuffing pipes. And short square fingers stuffing pipes. So S letter repeat हो रहा है. As does line 45, as if to evoke the whispers of the certainties on which everybody agrees, assured of certain certainties. यानी कि कुछ काम तो होके ही रहेंगे या हमको करने ही हैं. Eyes in line 43 and certainties also form a half rhyme or slant rhyme, possibly hinting at eyes winking at each other to indicate their shared knowledge. The most abundant technique here, however, is the repeated of and, which picks up on the same technique of line 42, 4 and 5 and 6, to create a sense of piling up of endless monotony. Piling up यानी कि उसका ढेर लग रहा है. कहने का मतलब ये है कि शहरी जीवन में काम करने होते हैं, लगातार करने होते हैं और उनकी भीड़ बढ़ती जा रही है उन कामों की, कार्यों की, लेकिन बेजान तरीके से किया जा रहा है. एंड शॉर्ट स्क्वायर फिंगर्स, स्टफिंग पाइप्स एंड इवनिंग न्यूज़पेपर्स एंड आइज. दिस रेपिटेटिव यूज़ ऑफ अ ब्लैंड कनेक्टिव, ब्लैंड यानी कि बेजान, कनेक्टिव यानी कि कंजंक्शन शब्द जो कि यहाँ पर एंड है, used to link things which need have no logical connection, unlike contrasting connectives such as however, which only makes sense if there is a link between the ideas being contrasted. Mimics means copies the dehumanized repetitive routine of simply doing things like smoking pipes and reading the evening newspaper for the sake of it. Again, the implication is that city dwellers are going through the motions of life, having been zapped of their individuality. यानी कि हर एक व्यक्ति का जो अपना अस्तित्व है वो कहीं खो गया है शहर की भीड़ में. The vagueness of certain certainties recalls similarly vague references to the woman's vision in poem 3 and the sordid images making up her soul, while being very detailed in its descriptions of physical and material objects such as rubbish, body parts and buildings. Preludes is very vague whenever it focuses on psychological, mystical or religious themes. Perhaps this is in order to understand a moral and spiritual vacuum, यानी कि खालीपन, in the heart of the modern world. Such vagueness continues with lines 46-47, which extend the personification of the environment seen at the start of poem 4, the conscience of a blackened street, impatient to assume the world. Both begin to endow the environment, endo means to give the environment, with the moral values absent from the human characters, So the skies contain a crucified soul, and here and street has a conscience, a setup from the morning's consciousness of line 14 because of its moral connotations. Connotations का मतलब होता है अर्थ या meaning. Crucially, however, this conscience is impatient to assume the world, meaning that it is currently absent like an actor waiting to come on stage. Lines 45 to 47 are standard iambic tetrameter, but lines 43 to 44 are unusual. The former has 5 stressed syllables and short square fingers stuffing pipes, whereas the latter only has 3 and evening news papers and eyes. Perhaps this meant to subtly undermine the regularity implied by certainties, which, as with everything related to routine, in preludes is considered a masquerade. Lines 48 to 51. I am moved by fancies that are curled around these images and cling. The notion of some infinitely gentle, infinitely suffering thing. These lines contain the first and only use of the first person in preludes. It is highly unusual to delay the introduction of a poem's speaker until the very end of a poem, but this serves to isolate the speaker from the reader. It also positions the last 7 lines of preludes as a kind of epilogue to the rest of the poem. The revelation that the preceding, means what came before, poem is the result of the speaker being moved by fancies. Fancies here meaning fantasies or daydreams, जो सपने हम आंखें खोलकर देखते हैं, prompted by these images of the city, undermines its carefully established sense of reality. These lines imply that the city represents only an illusion of reality, an idea first evoked with the reference to city routines being nothing more than masquerades. In line 19, city life is not real life or natural life, the poem seems to be saying. Something also suggested by the appearance of visions in poem 3, by the Christian imagery earlier in poem 4, and the increasing personification of the environment at the expense of human characters. The reference in lines 50-51 to the notion of some infinitely gentle, infinitely suffering thing is so vague as to be impossible to reliably interpret. That is, we cannot really understand what is being said. However, it does reinforce the poem's earlier Christian imagery by placing the city scenes with all their unnaturally segmented clock time. Segmented means divided into parts within an infinite timeline. Just as Christianity follows an infinite timeline, infinite meaning never ending, since God existed before creation and will exist for eternity. यानी कि जैसे ईश्वर हमेशा हैं, वैसे ही क्रिश्चियंस मानते हैं कि क्रिश्चियन रिलीजन हमेशा रहेगा. Moreover, the fact that this thing is both gentle and suffering recalls the figure of Christ, who was also both gentle and suffering. Again, though this is all very ambiguous, means very vague and unclear, the exact nature of infinity and its relevance to daily life are not established by the poem. Whether the awareness that there is a deeper timeline than that of repetitive and dehumanizing clock time will actually have an effect on rehumanizing or redeeming humankind is impossible to determine. रीह्यूमनाइजिंग यानी कि दोबारा इंसान बनाना, एंड रिडीमिंग का मतलब है किसी को आ, विपरीत परिस्थितियों से बचाना या निकाल लाना। जैसे जीसस क्राइस्ट ने हमको हमारे पापों से बचाया था। पुट डिफरेंटली, the poem does not clarify, means explain, whether realizing that there is more than this artificial city life will actually do anything to restore the humanity of the dismal, means unhappy, robotic city dwellers. The meter of these lines is highly irregular, which is appropriate given its separate status from the rest of the poem. Line 48 is roughly trochaic pentameter, which is an inversion with an extra foot of the regular meter. This means it can be read differently, but it is certainly a big difference from the steadiness of the line preceding it, यानी कि जो पहले आई थी. I am moved by fancies that are curled. Here is line 47 for comparison. Impatient to assume the world is basically flipping the meter of these lines, as it is as if the speaker is pulling off the curtain and revealing that what is behind it is totally different from what readers have come to expect. Lines 50-54. Wipe your hands across your mouth and laugh. The worlds revolve like ancient women, gathering fuel in vacant lots. The poem ends with a command to another anonymous you, telling this person, wipe your hand across your mouth and laugh. A laugh or smile can mean many things. Think of Mona Lisa, the famous painting. So just what this laugh suggests is very ambiguous, means vague. इसका meaning clear नहीं है. It could be a cynical response to the ideas of eternity presented in the previous lines, or an ironic dismissal of city life by a higher being, that is, by God. When paired with the last two lines of the poem, which compare the vast movement of entire worlds to those of ancient women gathering fuel, it might be likelier that it is more possible that this line is a dismissal of both eternity and of daily life. Since the poem concludes by comparing these two timelines, which were earlier only contrasted, perhaps its conclusion is that deeper ideas of time, represented here by worlds revolving and the reference to ancient history, actually resemble the repetitive motions of daily routine, rather than offering, as Christians would have it, a redemption or an escape from that monotony. This is emphasized by the adjective ancient, which, in addition to meaning very old, also specifically recalls ancient civilizations. On the surface, members of such civilizations had very different lives from those of modern city dwellers. But whereas Greek or Roman women may have gathered grain and modern women fuel, their repetitive lives nonetheless resemble one another's at a deeper level. यानी कि पुराने ज़माने की औरतों ने चाहे धान इकट्ठा किया हो और नए ज़माने की औरतों ने लकड़ी इकट्ठी की है जलाने के लिए, आग जलाने के लिए, ये काम रिपीट होते हैं, रोज़ करने होते हैं. तो एक स्तर पर आकर, एक लेवल पे आकर पुराने ज़माने की औरतों की ज़िंदगी और नए ज़माने की औरतों की ज़िंदगी में कोई ज़्यादा बदलाव नहीं है या डिफरेंस नहीं है. Both go out every day to carry out, without much thought, the tasks they carried out the day before. In other words, maybe this is the poem's way of saying that the robotic, meaningless, endless drudgery of city life is not anything new. Human beings are simply doomed to such an existence. यानी कि ये हमारी नियति है और हमें रोज़ कार्य करने हैं जो कि अर्थहीन हैं और जिसमें कोई ना तो आनंद है ना खुशी है. Quite a dismal way to end a poem. और इसी के साथ प्रिलूड्स का मीनिंग हमने देख लिया है. इसके बाकी के जो पहलू हैं, फॉर एग्ज़ाम्पल थीम्स वगैरह, मैं इसका PDF शेयर करूँगी, आप उसको पढ़कर समझ सकते हैं. थैंक यू.